I've survived ambushes from men who meant to bury me 6 feet under, but nothing, not one thing, compared to the ambush that landed on my desk that afternoon. There, neatly stacked, was an envelope marked Henrico County Circuit Court, Land Records. The words Land Records hit me like a punch in the gut. It was the last thing I expected to see that day, the last thing I wanted to see in a life built from honest work and sweat. I slid the envelope open with steady hands, too steady, considering what I'd just found. Inside there was a deed, my name, Richard Bennett, printed neat and clean. Only the signature beneath it wasn't mine. Not a chance. The ink wasn't even the same shade as mine. The loop on the R looked too wide, the tail too soft. It wasn't my hand that signed that. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. It was Friday, September 14th, 2018. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the floor of my workshop, spilling light across a desk littered with old receipts and invoices. I had just finished adjusting the carburetor on a '67 Mustang when this betrayal landed in my lap. The deed was for $2 million. $2 million. It wasn't just paper, it was my future. My savings, my life's work, a forgery. Someone had gone to all this trouble to steal it from me. I looked at the deed again, flipping through it as though it could somehow make sense of what had happened. Derek's name was there too. Derek Allen Collins, my son-in-law. A name I had trusted, a man who had my daughter's heart, and now my legacy was slipping through his fingers as though it was a mere transaction to him. The words on the deed were technical. Recorded instrument, deed of trust and assignment of rents. There was an instrument number, 2018-0913004376, and a stamp, book 8423, page 191. But to me it might as well have been a slap in the face. I had been working with cars for over 30 years. I rebuilt engines, tuned carburetors, and kept this business going with my hands and my head. No nonsense. Every dollar I earned was earned through sweat and grit. My pension was simple. The value of my shop, my savings, and the small house I'd bought with my late wife back in '92. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Now it was gone. Stolen in plain sight with a signature I never wrote. I set the deed down, my hand pressing hard against the edges of the paper. The sting of betrayal didn't come from the money. That would come later, but from the fact that this man Derek had the gall to forge my signature and pretend like he could take it all. My own daughter's husband, a man who had the audacity to look me in the eyes and lie. The door chime rang, pulling me out of the trance. Derek walked in, as casual as ever, hands shoved deep in his pockets, and a smile that could sell sand in the desert. He had that look on his face, the one he put on when he thought he was about to sell me something. "Pop," he said, and I could feel the weight of the word pressing against me. He was the only one who called me that, and it never sat right. He had no idea that everything he had planned was about to unravel. "Got a minute?" He walked past my desk, glancing at the stacks of parts, the old Mustang propped up on jacks. The same stuff I'd been fixing for years. Nothing new, nothing out of the ordinary, except the bomb he'd just dropped on my lap. "Make it quick," I said, my voice low, but I could feel the fire behind my words. I wasn't sure if it was anger or the adrenaline of the moment, maybe a little of both. Derek tapped the desk with 2 fingers, leaning in like he was about to tell me something I should have already known. "I've got something big lined up for us, Pop. I know you've been talking about expanding, maybe a new lift, new bay, a second location out by Short Pump. Well, I've been working with this guy who specializes in unlocking equity. It's all creative financing, totally legal." "Financing?" I asked, barely able to keep the disgust from my voice. "What sets the rate?" "Intro 7.9, he said, not missing a beat. "Adjusts later, but by then we shall be so cash flow positive, it won't set matter." I stared at him. "What sips the collateral?" "Nothing major," he said, still smiling. "Just your house and the shop, a personal guarantee. But trust me, it sips a simple thing. We can pay it off in no time." My mind snapped back to the papers on the desk. The deed that wasn't mine, the numbers that didn't add up. "What's this?" I asked, pulling the deed forward, setting it on the desk between us. Derek's smile faltered for just a second, barely noticeable. He didn't expect me to catch it, didn't expect me to know the weight of what I was looking at, but I saw it. That, he shrugged, as if it was nothing. Oh, that SIP's just the preliminary stuff. They send it out for review. You know how these title companies work. They send over a draft, then we fill in the blanks. I leaned forward, tapping the paper with my finger. This is my name, I said slowly. And that SIP's your name right next to mine. Forgery, I added, my voice low, ice cold. And this was not signed by me. Not ever. He blinked. Just once, and then he played it smooth. Pop, come on. You SEPT're looking at it wrong. It SEPT's a technicality. We SEPT're getting things in place. It SEPTR's all above board, you can trust me. I could feel my chest tighten, not just from the betrayal, but from the anger now rising inside me. You forged my name, Derek, I said, my voice harder this time. You didn't just ask for help. You stole. He took a step back, his demeanor shifting, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was trying to regain control, trying to make it sound like he was the good guy. I didn't do anything wrong, Pop. You've always taught me to think big. This is just a way to make everything better. For you, for Emily, for all of us. It's just a business move. I watched him, every word falling from his mouth like a charm, each one laced with a lie, a manipulation. But he didn't know the man he was talking to. I wasn't the soft target he thought I was. I'll deal with this, I said, my voice steady but filled with a new certainty. The war was on. And this time it wasn't fought with guns. It was fought with paperwork, and I knew exactly how to fight back. He was in over his head. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and I was alone again. I looked down at the deed, the forged signatures still staring up at me. It wasn't just my money he was after. It was my legacy. I stood up, walked over to the filing cabinet, and opened the top drawer. The papers I needed were right where I'd left them. A blank index card, red ink. I wrote the date, the deed number, and Derek's name, underlined it twice. Forgery, I added underneath. I wasn't going to let this slide. The whiskey bottle on the shelf caught my eye. It had been a gift from a Marine brother years ago, a reminder of the battles we fought together. I took it down and poured a glass. I didn't need to drink it, but I needed to hold it. The smell of oak and fire seemed to settle my thoughts, just enough. Let Sis see how deep this rabbit hole goes, I muttered to the empty room. But Youssef already made the first mistake, Derek. You underestimated me. The door shut behind Derek with a soft click. That was it. The line in the sand had been drawn, and now I was alone with a decision that would haunt me for months. I stared at the deed on my desk, the weight of it heavier than anything I'd held before. But I wasn't going to rush into this. Not this time. It was late Friday evening when I left the shop. The moon was a thin sliver in the sky, just enough light to give everything a half shadow. The city of Richmond looked quieter than usual, like it was holding its breath for the storm that was brewing. I didn't have the energy to fight the darkness right then, so I let the quiet swallow me whole. At home, the house felt like an echo of what it used to be. It wasn't just the empty rooms or the silence that filled every corner. It was the fact that it used to be filled with her, Emily's mom, my wife, who had passed 5 years ago. Every inch of the house still smelled like her fresh laundry, a hint of lavender and the faintest trace of cinnamon from the cookies she'd bake on Sundays. The clock on the wall ticked, loud in the silence, reminding me that time had never been more precious or more fragile. I walked through the kitchen, the same floorboards creaking under my boots. There was a bottle of whiskey on the top shelf of the cupboard, unopened for weeks. I'd told myself it was for special occasions, but what the hell counted as special anymore? The truth was, I was scared of what this whole situation meant for my family, scared of the man my daughter had married, and scared of how I was going to handle the mess I was in. I grabbed the bottle, unscrewed the cap, and poured myself a glass. The amber liquid burned as it slid down my throat. But it wasn't enough. It wouldn't be enough. Nothing would be enough until I figured out how to undo what Derek had done. But how? How do you fight a man who was part of your family, who knew every corner of your life? He had everything on his side: charm, money, the ability to talk his way out of anything. I'd been around the block enough times to know that a man who plays dirty rarely gets caught in the act. I pulled out the deed again, as though staring at it would somehow make the situation clearer. I looked at the forged signature, the penmanship that was almost mine but not quite. I could almost hear Derek's voice in my head, his smooth tones trying to convince me that everything was just a misunderstanding, that it was all just business. That was his favorite word, business. As if business could justify stealing from me, from us. A loud knock on the door broke the silence. I jumped, the whiskey sloshing in my glass. My heart raced. Was it Derek? Was it the police? My instincts screamed at me to stay calm, but my hand was already on the door handle before I could think it through. When I opened it, Michael stood in the doorway, looking more grown-up than I ever wanted him to. 17, but already taller than me by a good 2 inches. His face was set in that way it gets when he's trying to figure out if he's walking into something he shouldn't. "Dad, you okay?" he asked, his voice steady but with a little edge of concern. "Yeah," I said, nodding, though my hands were shaking slightly. Just trying to figure something out." He stepped inside, the door creaking behind him as he closed it. Michael's eyes darted to the whiskey on the counter and the papers spread out on the table, but he didn't say anything. He was smart enough not to ask about things he wasn't ready to hear, but I knew he was watching me closely, taking in every detail. "Is Derek still here?" he asked quietly, his voice a little guarded. "No," I said, my voice sharp. "He left. But we've got problems, Michael. Big ones." Michael didn't ask what kind of problems. He didn't need to, he knew. I didn't want to drag him into this mess, but I knew I couldn't keep it from him forever. Derek had tried to take something that wasn't his, and now it was up to me to protect what I had left: my business, my legacy, and most importantly, my family. "I said I'll take care of it," I said, more to myself than to Michael. I swallowed another mouthful of whiskey, trying to push away the fear that had started to claw at me. "But it's gonna take time. We still need evidence. A plan." He nodded, his face serious. "Do you want me to help?" I smiled, but it was thin, a shadow of my usual self. "You stir already helping just by being here. This isn't set your fight, son, but I still get it sorted." "Just don't set to do anything crazy," Michael said, his eyes locking with mine. "You know Mom would Seth wanted us to keep it together." His words hit me like a fist. Emily wasn't here to see this, to tell me what to do, but her voice echoed in my mind. "Don't lose yourself to anger, Richard. Don't let this consume you." I set the glass down and ran my hand over my face. "I won sit, but this is bigger than just me. I can sit, let Derek think he can get away with this. He thinks he sits smart, but he doesn't sit know who he sits dealing with." Michael didn't argue. Instead, he just nodded and stood by the door as though he knew this was a battle I had to fight alone. "Okay," he said softly. "Just don't do anything stupid, all right? I sepa not saying I don't trust you. I just don't want you to get hurt." I walked over to the fridge, grabbed a couple of cold beers for both of us, and handed one to Michael. "We'll figure this out," I said, trying to convince both him and myself. We sat at the kitchen table in silence for a while, neither of us speaking as we sipped our drinks. The weight of the situation hung in the air, thick as fog. But I wasn't going to show it, not to Michael. Not yet. I needed to keep it together. I had to, for him, for Emily, and for myself. The house felt colder now, the silence stretching longer than before. The walls were closing in, and for the first time in years I didn't know if I had the strength to fight this battle alone. But I would. I had no other choice. Derek had underestimated me before. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Tomorrow I'd start the plan. The first step, but tonight I let the whiskey burn my throat and gave myself a moment to prepare for what was coming. The next few days bled into one another, each one marked by a rising knot in my stomach. It wasn't just the forged deed hanging over my head, it was Emily, my daughter, the one person who had every reason to trust me, who should have been the first to see through Derek's lies. But she didn't. Not yet. By Monday, Derek was already back at work, his phone calls slicker than ever, and his presence in my life felt like a shadow, following me everywhere I went. I could hear his voice when I was alone, in my shop, in the quiet of my office. It haunted me, and as much as I hated it, I knew I couldn't make a move until Emily knew what I was dealing with, until she saw it herself. That evening, Emily came by the shop with her usual bright energy, her long brown hair tied back in a messy ponytail, a few strands falling loose around her face. She didn't notice the tension I was carrying, not yet. She was too wrapped up in the idea of Derek being the good guy, the one who'd help us, the one who had a plan. "Dad," she said, her voice light and unassuming. "Derek said's got some new ideas for the shop. He wants to talk to you about it over dinner tonight. What do you think?" I looked up from the car I was working on. The rusted fender had become my focus, but now my hands trembled as I wiped the grease on my rag. My heart was already pounding. "I don't know him. I'm not sure I'm ready for another ideas from him." I tried to sound casual, but I could hear the strain in my own voice. She didn't notice. "Come on, Dad," Emily pressed. "You've been stuck in here working for days. You deserve a break." And Derek sips, offering a solution. "We can have a nice dinner, talk it out. It'll be fine." "It'll be fine." The words echoed in my mind like a lullaby designed to keep me calm. But I wasn't calm. The last thing I wanted to do was sit across the table from Derek, pretending everything was normal, pretending this wasn't a betrayal of the highest order. But Emily didn't know. She couldn't see what he was doing, and as much as I hated it, I had to let her walk this path for a little while longer. I had to let her believe he was the answer. "All right," I said, finally. But I sipped, not making any promises. That night, I walked into my house to the smell of lasagna and garlic bread, the kind of comforting warmth that only Emily could bring to the table. She had her back to me as she set the table, humming to herself. It should have felt like home, but instead it felt like a battlefield. Derek was already seated at the table when I walked in, smiling wide, that look of "I've got everything under control" written all over his face. His slacks were pressed, and his shirt was ironed just a little too sharp, like he'd spent the day in front of a mirror rehearsing this very moment. He didn't stand when I walked in, didn't offer a handshake, just a nod like he was entitled to be here. "Evening, Richard," he said, his voice too smooth for comfort. "Evening," I muttered, taking the seat across from him. The air between us was thick, charged, but I wasn't going to let it show. Not yet. Emily set down the last dish, and we all sat, the clink of silverware and plates the only sound filling the room. She looked between us, smiling like a kid who doesn't know what's coming. She deserves to be this happy, I thought, even though it stung to see her so blind. "So," Emily said, her eyes alight with excitement, "Derek has been working on this amazing idea, and I think it could be really good for you, Dad." I forced a smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Well, we've been talking about expanding the shop. It's a good idea, right?" Derek chimed in, his smile smooth. "We've got the space, we've got the equipment. All we need is the capital to get started." There it was again, his familiar pitch. He was trying to sell me on something that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with his needs. I had to be careful. The minute I let my guard down, he would try to spin it into something that I was supposed to want.
I don't know, Derek,"
I said, keeping my tone neutral. "It sounds a little too big for what I had in mind." He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and measured. "Well, that's the thing. You're thinking too small. You've been running this place for decades. You've earned the opportunity to make more. Let's make it happen together. I'm offering to back you, Richard. I'm offering to help you grow, not just maintain." There it was. The hook. It was more than just money, it was control. He didn't want to grow the shop for the sake of the family. He wanted to manipulate the situation so that I'd have no choice but to follow his lead. I saw it in his eyes, that glint of greed, the way he thought he could win me over with his polished sales pitch. "You cert not backing me, Derek," I said, my voice tight. "You cert backing yourself, and you cert using me to get what you want." Emily didn't hear it, though. She was busy serving the lasagna, smiling at me as she did. She didn't hear the edge in my voice, didn't see the game Derek was playing. What's the big deal, Dad? Emily said, her smile fading slightly as she caught the tension in my tone. This could be good for all of us. Why can't Sept you just see it? Sep's trying to help. We are trying to help. I felt a pang in my chest, a sharp ache. She was blind and it hurt to watch, but I couldn't tell her yet. I couldn't break her heart, not this way. Not when she was so sure Derek was the answer. I don't that know, Em. I just need time to think about it, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. This is a big decision. I can make it in one night. Emily sighed but didn't press further. She was too tired of the back and forth, I could tell. Derek's charm was already working on her, and I was losing her little by little. As we ate, the conversation drifted, as it always did when Derek was around. Small talk, meaningless chatter about business deals, about nothing important. But underneath it I could feel the weight of it all, the lies, the betrayal, and my own inability to protect Emily from it. That night, after dinner, Emily hugged me and kissed me on the cheek before heading to bed. I love you, Dad, she said, her voice sweet and innocent, like she didn't even know what I was going through. I love you too, Em, I said, watching her walk up the stairs. When I turned to Derek, he was already standing by the door, his jacket casually slung over one shoulder. I said will call you tomorrow, Richard, he said, his voice smooth again. We still get this figured out together. I didn't have to answer him, just nodded. When the door clicked shut behind him, I felt the weight of the house fall down on me. The betrayal wasn't just about the deed anymore. It was about Emily, the one person who should have been the first to see through his lies. But she didn't, not yet. And that was the hardest part of all. I sat down on the couch, the silence pressing in around me. I wasn't just fighting for money anymore. I was fighting for my family, my legacy, and for Emily's trust. And I wasn't going to lose it without a fight. It was Thursday, October 4th, 2018. The days were getting shorter, the evenings darker earlier, and the chill in the air reminded me that fall was here. But for me, it wasn't just the change in the seasons that kept me up at night. It was the knot in my gut that had been there since I found the forged deed. The feeling that something was slipping out of my grasp no matter how hard I tried to hold on. I stood in my shop, the familiar hum of the overhead lights buzzing overhead, the smell of oil and grease hanging thick in the air. My hands were still calloused, still strong, but even they couldn't undo what had already been done. Derek had taken the first step in what was going to be a long, ugly fight, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep up the pretense that everything was fine, that everything was under control. I needed help. I wasn't going to face this alone, not when there was so much at stake. My thoughts kept drifting back to my time in the Marines, back to the days when I fought beside men who would have laid down their lives for me. Men who didn't hesitate, who didn't question, but who fought with everything they had, no matter what. They were the kind of men who understood loyalty and sacrifice, who didn't shy away from battle, even when the odds seemed impossible. One name kept coming to mind, Marcus Mac Reddick, a brother in arms, a Marine who had my back when things went sideways in places most people couldn't even find on a map. Mac had a way of getting things done, especially when the odds were stacked against us. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, but I knew if I called him, he'd drop everything to help. We weren't just brothers in the military. We were brothers in life. I picked up the phone from the workbench, my fingers cold against the receiver. I dialed his number, each ring a slow drumbeat in the back of my mind. Please pick up, I thought. Please, I need this. Finally, I heard the familiar voice on the other end. Richard? Maxet's voice was deep, gravelly from years of shouting over the roar of helicopter blades. Hell, man. It's been a minute. You still kickin', Sits? Yeah, I said, forcing a smile even though he couldn't see it. But I'm still here. How you been? You know, same old, Mac replied. Just keepin' my head down, doin' my thing. What sets up? You don't Mac call unless it sets important. You sound off. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. It's Seps a mess, Mac. A real mess. You remember Derek, right? Emily Sepp's husband? Maxtut's voice instantly dropped to a serious tone. Yeah, I remember him. Guy Stut's got a smile that could sell a bridge, but something about him never sat right with me. What's Sepp's goin' set on? He tried to rob me, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. He forged my name on a $2 million deed, Mac. He Sepp's trying to take everything I Sepp's worked for. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear Mac exhale deeply. Then he spoke again, his voice calm but with the weight of understanding. "Goddamn," he muttered. "That Sepp's some cold shit right there, Richard. You sure about this?" "Yeah," I said. "I Sev got the deed. I Sev got the evidence. But it Seb's not just about the money. It Seb's about Emily. I can Seb's let him get away with this. And I can Seb's let her stay blind to what he Seb's doing." "All right," Max said after a moment. "You know I Sev got your back, Richard. Always have. Always will. What do you need from me?" I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Just hearing Mac's voice made everything feel a little more manageable. He wasn't just offering support, he was offering a way forward, the way he always did. "I need you to help me build a case," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've got to prove Derek's lying, that the deed's a fake. I've got documents, receipts, photos, the forged signature, but I need someone who knows how to handle this kind of thing. Someone who knows how to get the right eyes on it. I need you to help me dig into his finances, his debts. I need to find out who he's been dealing with." "Got it," Mac replied without hesitation. "I SIL put the word out. I know a few guys who can get us access to things. The right kind of people. And I SIL make sure we've got everything lined up. If he sets dirty, we SIL find it." I felt the tension in my chest ease, if only slightly. "Thanks, Mac. I knew I could count on you. And hey, when this is over, you and me, we gonna have one hell of a reunion. You in for a drink when I get this sorted?" "You bet your ass," Mac chuckled. "You just make sure you got the paperwork ready. You know I done a stut mess around with anyone who tries to pull a fast one. I still get back to you soon, Richard. Don't a stot worry about a thing." I hung up the phone, feeling something I hadn't felt in days, hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. I had a plan, and with Mac's help, it was going to work. I wasn't going to let Derek steal from me. Not this time. The shop was quiet again, the low hum of the overhead lights the only sound filling the space. I walked over to my workbench, the same place I'd stood countless times before. It had been my refuge for years. But tonight it felt different. I wasn't just fixing cars anymore. I was fixing something bigger, something that mattered more than any engine I'd ever rebuilt. I took a deep breath and turned my attention to the next step. I had a Marine brother on my side, and that was the most important thing I could have asked for. By mid-October, the weight of the situation had begun to take its toll. Every corner of my life felt like it was under a microscope, Derek's presence looming like a shadow I couldn't shake off. I wasn't sleeping much anymore, the days blending into one another as I sifted through receipts, invoices, and anything else that could give me an edge. I couldn't afford to miss a single detail. The house was quiet, too quiet. Emily had started spending more time away, a few dinners a week at Derek's place, like they were trying to convince themselves everything was normal. I could see through it all. This wasn't normal, this was betrayal. And I wasn't going to sit idly by while Derek carved up everything I'd worked for. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, when the weather was turning colder and the sun was hidden behind heavy clouds, that I found something new, something I hadn't been expecting. The receipt from Smith & Lake Paint Supply had come across my desk a few days earlier. I'd skimmed it at first, $2,883 for an order of paint materials, but something about the way it was coded in the system bothered me. It didn't add up with what I'd ordered. I pulled the invoice again, the numbers almost dancing in front of me as I studied them more closely. It wasn't just the cost that seemed off, it was the date. The purchase had been made on September 28th, the same day the forged deed had been filed. The purchase had been billed under my account, but there was no signature, just a reference number. No physical receipt from the shop. And that wasn't the only discrepancy. As I checked my account statement, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A $699,842 charge had been posted to my business credit card from a bank in New York, an account I'd never opened. That was when the first real breakthrough hit me. A gut feeling I'd been ignoring finally turned into a solid lead. I picked up the phone and dialed Clara. She was my sister, and though she wasn't in the business, she was sharp as a tack when it came to details. She'd always been my sounding board when things went sideways. Clara, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I need you to go through some of the records from the last few weeks. Start with the account statements for the business. There's something off with the purchases. What's going on? Clara asked, her voice immediately sharp with concern. Is it Derek? Yeah, I said, slumping into my old leather chair. It's him. He's been hiding money through the shop, buying things under my account and racking up debt. Damn, she muttered. You set your about this? I'm sure, I said. I got the receipts. I got the account statement. This wasn't set by just a simple fraud. This is premeditated. He's trying to take everything I built, but I need you to go through the records. Find everything you can. Clara paused.
All right, I hit spam on it.
I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. This wasn't just about the deed anymore. Derek had been trying to bleed me dry, and he wasn't going to stop until he had everything. But now I had something to fight back with. Evidence. The first piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Over the next few days, I spent my time digging through every document I could find, the pile of papers growing larger by the hour. Bank statements, credit card records, receipts from suppliers. Even the emails from Derek started to feel like pieces of a larger conspiracy. I'd learned from my years as a Marine that the smallest detail could make all the difference. A misplaced number, an insignificant word in an email, it all mattered. And Derek had made the fatal mistake of thinking I wouldn't notice. It was Friday when Clara called me back, her voice tense but confident. I went through the records, she said. You were right, there's a lot more going on than just the paint order. Derek's name shows up on a few payments I didn't know about. And there are also some invoices from a New York law firm, charges to your business credit card. What kind of charges? I asked, my stomach tightening. Legal fees, Clara replied. A lot of them, actually. Something isn't set right, Richard. He's been using your account for things that aren't just business related. You need to take a look at these files. There's more going on than we thought. My heart raced. Legal fees? From a law firm I didn't even know. This was bigger than I thought. Derek wasn't just trying to take over my business. He was trying to destroy it from the inside out. Thanks, Clara. Guess I'll take a look at everything you have sent me, I said, already feeling the adrenaline rush through me. Keep digging. There's something else here, and I need to know what it is. That night, after I got back from the shop, I sat in the dimly lit living room of the house, the papers spread out on the coffee table before me. I pulled out the recorder I'd bought months ago, hoping it would help me keep track of everything. I didn't know what Derek was capable of, but I knew he wouldn't expect me to have this much information on him. I clicked the record button and leaned back, my mind racing as I replayed every conversation I'd had with Derek. The way he spoke, the promises he'd made, the lies he'd told. I recorded everything I could remember, knowing that each word could be the key to breaking him wide open. As the recorder captured my voice, I thought back to my time in the Marines. I remembered the training, the discipline, the way every action had a purpose. Every conversation, every move, every piece of evidence. I had to treat it like a mission. I had to be methodical, precise, and I had to make sure Derek didn't get away with this. I was ready now, ready to take the fight to him. But this time, I wasn't going to fight with my fists. I was going to fight with evidence, receipts, recordings, and everything else I could dig up. By the time I stopped recording, I had a stack of evidence that would make any investigator proud. But I wasn't done yet. I still had to find the final piece, the one that would bring Derek down for good. And I was going to find it, no matter how long it took. By the first week of November, I had every document I needed. The piles on my desk grew larger every day. The receipts and account statements spread out like a map of everything Derek had tried to steal. I knew there was more out there, but what I had was enough to start, enough to make him sweat. The garage had always been my sanctuary. It was where I felt most myself, where the world outside faded, and all that mattered was the work in front of me. But now the work was different. Instead of tuning up engines and fixing carburetors, I was sharpening my focus on something far more dangerous. I was going to bring Derek down, piece by piece. It had been 2 weeks since I'd started piecing everything together. Clara had sent me every file she could find, digging deeper into Derek's financial transactions. Her work was invaluable, and every time I thought I had it all, she found something new. This wasn't just a betrayal anymore. It was a full-scale assault on everything I'd built, but I couldn't let it go. Not this time. I spent most of my time in the garage after hours, going over everything again. The receipts were piled in neat stacks on the workbench. The legal fees from the New York law firm, the unexplained purchases, the forged deed, every document was laid out with purpose, like a plan to take down a high-value target. Each piece of paper, each receipt was a weapon I could use against him. There was a method to the madness, though. Every morning I would spend a few hours running through the records in the office. Then I'd head to the garage, where I could think without the weight of the world pressing on me. I'd pace back and forth, looking at the files, thinking about what I knew and what I still had to find. It was on one of these late nights, with the overhead lights casting long shadows, that I realized something. Derek's greed wasn't just limited to money, he wanted control, and he was using Emily as a pawn to get it. I'd seen the way he'd been manipulating her, getting into her head, making her think I was the one standing in the way of progress. But it wasn't progress he wanted, it was my legacy, and he wasn't going to stop until he had it all. As I sat down at the workbench that night, something clicked. The receipts, the fake deeds, the legal fees. It was all part of a larger picture, and I knew exactly how to prove it. It wasn't just about showing that he'd forged my signature. It was about showing that he'd been running a full-fledged operation behind my back, trying to strip me of everything I'd worked for, piece by piece. I stood up, pacing the length of the garage, my thoughts running faster than my legs. The Marines used to teach us that the key to any mission was preparation. And preparation wasn't just about having the right tools, it was about knowing your enemy. Derek thought he had me cornered, but he didn't know I was already 5 steps ahead. He hadn't counted on me digging deep, on Clara uncovering the secret accounts, or on the evidence I had locked away in the garage. "You want to play dirty, Derek?" I muttered to myself. "Then let Simps play." I went to the filing cabinet in the back of the garage, pulling open the bottom drawer. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was the folder I'd been preparing for weeks. The one that held all the evidence I'd been collecting. The recordings, the bank statements, the invoices, all of it was there. But it wasn't enough just to have the papers. I needed to make sure this went beyond the courtroom. I needed to make sure that Derek knew there was no escape. I picked up my phone and dialed Maxip's number. "Richard?" Mac answered, his voice rough as though he'd just woken up. "Everything okay?" "No," I said, my voice low. "It's Sep's time. I've got everything I need, but I need your help with the next step. We need to make sure Derek doesn't just walk away from this." "What's the plan?" Mac asked immediately. No hesitation. He didn't need any more details. He knew what needed to be done. "I'm going to need a few good men to help me set up a meeting with Derek," I said, my eyes scanning the papers on the workbench. "I've got his back against the wall, but I need to know who's behind him, who's pulling the strings. We're not just going after Derek, we're going after everyone he's been working with." "I sets on it," Mac replied, his tone turning more serious. "We set'll make sure he knows there's no way out. You just focus on the evidence." I hung up, the weight of what was about to happen settling in. I was no longer just protecting myself. I was protecting my family, and that meant doing whatever it took to take Derek down. The next morning, I showed up at the shop early. Michael had stayed the night at a friend's house, and Emily was still at Derek's. The shop was empty, and the silence felt like the calm before the storm. I took the folder from the filing cabinet and spread the contents across the workbench. The forged deed, the receipts for the fake purchases, the photos of Derek and his associates, all of it was right here, ready to be used. But I knew I had to be careful. Derek was clever. He wouldn't go down without a fight. He'd been working behind the scenes for months, trying to get into my head, trying to turn Emily against me. But what he didn't understand was that he was playing a game with a man who had nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. By the time I was done, I had everything lined up, a plan to meet with Derek with Mac's help, and a strategy for making sure he couldn't worm his way out of this. It wasn't just about proving that he'd forged my signature. It was about showing that he'd been orchestrating everything from the beginning, using my trust against me. I sat down at the workbench, staring at the pile of documents in front of me. I felt the weight of what was coming, the storm that was about to break. But I wasn't scared. I wasn't backing down. Derek had made a huge mistake, and I was going to make sure he paid for it. The garage had become my war room, and it was time to finish this fight. It was the night before Thanksgiving, and the whole town of Richmond felt like it was holding its breath. The holiday was just around the corner, but for me it wasn't about food or family, it was about the plan. The one I'd been carefully putting together for weeks. I'd gathered the evidence, confirmed the debts, and with Mac's help I knew I was ready. It was time for Derek to face the truth. The house was warm with the smell of turkey roasting in the oven, but it felt like a battleground. Emily had spent all afternoon in the kitchen, preparing a meal that had been a tradition since her mother was still around. It was her way of holding on to the past, of keeping things normal, but nothing about this night felt normal. I was supposed to be grateful. Thanksgiving, after all, was about family, about giving thanks for what we had. But I couldn't help the bitter taste that lingered on my tongue. Derek's betrayal hung over the table like a storm cloud, and Emily was still blissfully unaware of what was really going on. As much as I hated it, I knew what had to be done. It wasn't just about my money anymore. It was about protecting Emily and making sure she knew who Derek really was. The table was set, the wine poured, and the plates were passed around. The conversation was light at first, too light, too forced, but I could see through it. I could see the way Derek smiled a little too wide, his hand resting possessively on Emily's shoulder, like he was in control. But he wasn't. He had no idea what was coming. "This looks amazing, Em," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral, though every word felt heavy. "It's been a while since we sets had had a big family dinner like this." Emily smiled, her eyes lighting up as she looked from me to Derek. "I thought it'd be nice to bring some old traditions back this year," she said. "You know, after everything that's happened." Her voice faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. Derek took a sip of wine, his eyes narrowing just slightly, like he could sense the tension in the room but didn't know where it was coming from. "Well," he said, a little too casually, "I'm glad to be part of this. It's important to me. You know, family." His words didn't ring true. They never did. I placed my fork down gently, leaning back in my chair. "Yeah," I said slowly, looking Derek square in the eye. "Family is important." There was a moment of silence, a brief but charged pause before Emily picked up the conversation again. "Dad, Don set be like this. It sets Thanksgiving." I didn't break eye contact with Derek. "I know him," I said, my voice steady, even though my insides were churning. "But this is more than just a holiday dinner. This is about something that's been eating at me for a while now." I looked at Emily and then back at Derek. "There's something I need to say, and I'm not going to wait any longer." The air in the room shifted, like a cloud had passed over the sun. Emily's eyes darted between us, her expression confused, but Derek's face hardened. He knew exactly where this was going. "What sep's going on, Dad?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. "You seps are acting like—" "No." I cut her off, my voice firm now. "You need to hear this. Both of you need to hear this." I reached for the folder I had tucked underneath my chair, the one filled with the receipts, the forged deed, the photos, and the bank statements. It felt like the weight of the world was in that folder, but I wasn't going to hold back anymore. I slid the folder across the table, pushing it toward Derek. "There's no more hiding, Derek." Emily Sipp's eyes went wide, her gaze flicking from the folder to Derek and back to me. "What is this, Dad?" "This is the truth," I said, locking eyes with Derek. "The truth you Seth been hiding from all of us. The truth about you, Derek, and what you Seth been doing behind closed doors." He didn't move for a moment, staring at the folder like it was a bomb about to go off. Then, slowly, he reached for it. The sound of the paper being pulled from the folder was deafening in the silence that had fallen over the room. Derek glanced at the documents inside. Quick, sharp glances, and I could see the color drain from his face. "What is this?" Emily asked again, her voice trembling now. "What the hell is this, Dad?" "It's the proof," I said quietly, my voice hard. "The proof that Derek has been using this family, this business, to run his own scams. He forged my name on a $2 million deed. He's been running up debt on my business credit card, buying things without my knowledge, and hiding money in accounts I didn't even know existed." Emily Sips's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between Derek and me, like she couldn't set believe what she was hearing. "No, no, that can set be. It's Sep's all true," I said, my voice softer now, as much for her as for me. "I didn't Sep want to believe it either, but I can't Sep ignore it anymore. Derek Sep's been lying to you, Emily. Sep's been using you." Derek's eyes flicked from the papers to me, and his expression was something I'd never seen before. Something raw, a mixture of panic and rage. But he didn't yell. He didn't make excuses. Instead, he did the one thing I knew he would. He tried to manipulate. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said, his voice strained. "You don't know what you start talking about, Richard. This is just business. All of this is business?" I cut him off, my voice sharp as a whip. "This isn't set of business, Derek. This is theft. You've been stealing from me, from Emily, from our family, and I said I'm not going to let you get away with it anymore." There was a long silence after that. Emily was shaking, her hands gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing holding her up. She didn't look at Derek. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the papers in front of her, the words on the page slowly sinking in. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Derek, is this true?" Derek opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For the first time since I'd met him, he was speechless. The mask had cracked, and now, for the first time, the truth was staring him in the face. "It sets over," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "You set's done, Derek. You set's going to answer for what you set's done, and it one set's be at this table. It one set's be in front of Emily." The air in the room was thick with tension, the weight of the moment crashing down on all of us. I looked at Emily, my heart breaking as I saw the pain in her eyes. She had been so sure of him, and now that certainty was shattered. "I said I'm sorry, Em," I said softly, my voice rough with emotion. "I wish I didn't have to do this, but I said I'm doing it because I love you." Emily looked up at me then, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't speak at first. She just stared at me like she was trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. And I knew then, knew with a certainty I couldn't explain, that this wasn't just about me. It was about her, and no matter what, I was going to protect her from the man who had betrayed her. "You didn't lose me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You gave me away. But I can forgive you for this, Derek?" The words landed like a hammer. Derek's face twisted in disbelief as he stood up, stumbling back from the table. He opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. He was broken, and he knew it. The silence was deafening. And that was when I knew Derek had lost. The game was over. The door slammed behind Derek with a force that rattled the glass in the windows. The sound of his heavy footsteps on the porch echoed into the empty house, each one a reminder of the battle that had just taken place, of the war that was now well and truly underway. Inside, the air was still, thick with the weight of the silence that followed. Emily sat at the table, her hands shaking, her eyes wide and haunted by the truth she had just heard. I could see the way her mind was racing, the shock of it all still settling in, trying to make sense of the chaos Derek had woven around her for so long. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stared at the place where Derek had been sitting, as if trying to piece together what was real and what had been lies. I stood at the door for a moment, watching her, unsure of what to say. There was nothing to say, not yet. This wasn't about words, this was about the truth that had to sink in before anything else could happen. "Emily," I said softly, my voice breaking the stillness like a knife through fog. She didn't look at me right away, but when she did, her eyes were filled with a mix of confusion, hurt, and something I hadn't expected. Anger, not at me, but at herself. "Why didn't you tell me, Dad?" she asked. Her voice quiet but firm. "Why didn't you warn me sooner?" I felt the weight of her words settle on my shoulders like a mountain. She wasn't blaming me for what Derek had done, not entirely, but she was blaming me for not seeing the signs sooner. I understood it. As a father, I should have protected her, should have warned her before Derek's lies took root, but I had held back, thinking it was better to let her figure things out on her own, hoping the truth would come in its own time. I had been wrong. I didn't want to destroy your relationship, I admitted, stepping into the room and sitting across from her at the table. I didn't want to hurt you, Em, but I couldn't keep letting him use us. I had to step in before it went any further. She nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving me. The anger in her eyes faded, replaced by something more raw, grief. "But I loved him," she said softly, as if speaking the words aloud would make the reality of it all less painful. "I believed him. I trusted him." The words hit me harder than I expected. My heart ached for her, for the person she had been before all of this, before the lies and the manipulation. But I had to remind myself that it wasn't just Derek she had trusted. It was her own instincts, her own ability to see the good in people. Derek had known how to play on that, how to twist it until he had everything he wanted, and I had failed to see it in time. "I know," I said gently, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I know you did, Em. But you are not the one who failed here. Derek is. He sips the one who lied, who stole from us. Not you, not me. We sit'll get through this together." She didn't respond immediately. She just sat there, her fingers tracing the edge of her wine glass, the silence between us stretching longer than it should have. I let her take the time she needed. I knew there was nothing I could say that would take the pain away right now. She needed to process this on her own terms. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke again. "What happens now?" The question hung in the air like a cloud that hadn't yet decided to rain. I had been waiting for it, the moment when she would finally ask. But now that it was here, I wasn't sure I had the right answer. The truth was, I didn't know. I could take Derek to court, expose his lies, show the world who he really was. But what would that do to Emily, to our family? "Now," I said slowly, "we make sure Derek doesn't get away with this. We bring him to justice, but we do it in a way that protects us. We don't just take his word for it anymore. We take the evidence, everything he's done, all the proof I've gathered, and we show the world the kind of man he really is." Emily nodded, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. I knew she wasn't ready for what was coming next. The truth had hit her like a freight train, and she hadn't even had time to process everything yet. It wasn't just Derek's betrayal she had to face. It was her own shattered trust. The years she'd spent believing in someone who had only used her. "And you, Dad?" she asked quietly. "What about you? How do we move forward after everything that's happened?" I looked at her, my heart aching with the weight of her question. "We move forward by sticking together," I said, my voice steady. "We are not going to let him tear us apart. We are stronger than that, and we are going to make sure he never does this to anyone again." She didn't say anything else, but I saw the glimmer of something in her eyes, a spark of determination, maybe even a flicker of hope. It was the first time in days that I'd seen that look in her eyes, and it gave me hope too. After a long silence, I got up from the table and went to the kitchen, where the turkey was still sitting, waiting to be carved. The room felt quieter now, the tension gone, replaced by the heaviness of what was to come. But I wasn't afraid of the fight, not anymore. When I returned to the table, Emily was still sitting there, but her expression had changed. She looked tired, but there was a newfound strength in her that hadn't been there before. She was ready in her own way to face what lay ahead. "We shall get through this, Dad," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "We shall make sure Derek pays for what he did to us." I nodded, proud of her. She wasn't broken, she was stronger than she realized, and together we would make sure Derek understood that there were consequences for betrayal, that no one, no matter how charming or manipulative, could escape the truth forever. As I carved the turkey and served the meal, the weight of the evening's conversation still hung over us. But it was a new weight, one that didn't feel quite as suffocating as before. Derek had made his move. Now it was time for us to make ours. The courtroom was small, cramped even, but it felt like the world's eyes were on me. The long wooden tables, the creaky chairs, the low murmur of voices in the background, all of it disappeared as soon as the door to the courtroom closed behind me. This was it. The moment I had been preparing for, the moment I had been dreading. I had expected to feel nervous, maybe even afraid. After all, this was a high-stakes game. Derek had the charm, the connections, and the money. He could afford a team of high-priced lawyers, the kind that could twist the truth into something unrecognizable. But as I stood in the courtroom, I didn't feel fear. I felt focused. This wasn't about winning or losing. This was about justice. I took a deep breath, the scent of musty paper and legal documents thick in the air. I had spent months collecting every shred of evidence, every receipt, every photo, and every recording. Now they would all come together. This was the moment where Derek's lies would fall apart. My attorney Claire stood beside me, her dark hair pulled back into a tight bun, her face calm but determined. She had been my rock through all of this, guiding me through the legal labyrinth and making sure I didn't lose sight of the goal. Her eyes met mine briefly, offering a silent word of reassurance. I could tell she was ready for this. Derek was already seated at the defendant's table, his lawyer beside him, whispering in his ear. He looked different than I remembered. His usual confidence had given way to something darker. There was a nervous energy about him now, a subtle twitch in his fingers, a slight sweat on his brow. The truth was closing in on him, and he could feel it. Emily had come with me to court that day, sitting silently behind me. She hadn't said much since Thanksgiving dinner, and I could tell she was still processing everything. She had been caught in the middle of this storm, and now she was seeing the full scope of Derek's betrayal. But she was strong. She was my daughter, after all. And today we would fight together. The judge, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses and an air of quiet authority, called the court to order. "This is the case of Richard Bennett versus Derek Collins," he said, his voice echoing in the room. "Mr. Bennett is alleging fraud and forgery. We will begin with opening statements. Mr. Bennett's attorney, you may proceed." Claire stood and made her way to the front of the room, her steps steady and sure. She glanced back at me one last time before addressing the court. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and confident. "This is not a case of simple fraud. This is a case of betrayal. Mr. Bennett trusted the defendant, Mr. Derek Collins, as a member of his family. Mr. Collins abused that trust by forging Mr. Bennett's signature on a deed worth $2 million money that was meant to provide for Mr. Bennett's retirement and the future of his family." I felt the weight of her words settle in, like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward. This wasn't just about money. This was about integrity, about loyalty, about the destruction of a family. "We have evidence, Your Honor," Claire continued, "including forged documents, bank statements showing unauthorized charges, and recordings of Mr. Collins discussing his plans to deceive Mr. Bennett. Collins has tried to steal what does not belong to him, and it is our belief that the court will see the truth of his actions." I could see Derek's face tightening as she spoke, his eyes flicking to his lawyer, his mouth tightening into a thin line. But there was nothing he could do now. The truth was out, and it was too late for him to cover it up. The judge nodded, his expression unchanged. "Thank you, Miss Thomas. Mr. Collins, SEFT attorney, you may present your opening statement." Derek's lawyer, a slick man in a dark suit, stood up and adjusted his tie. He was a professional, smooth, polished, and ready to fight. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with confidence, "this case is nothing more than a misunderstanding, a simple mistake. Mr. Collins is a businessman, a man trying to make the best of a difficult situation. The documents in question were misfiled, and any accusations of forgery are baseless. Mr. Collins has every right to manage his assets, and any suggestion that he tried to defraud Mr. Bennett is simply false." The defense attorney's words were smooth, rehearsed, but they rang hollow. His words lacked the weight of truth. He was trying to spin a story, but the evidence was already stacked against Derek. The room could feel it. The air was thick with the weight of it. Derek's lawyer went on, but I wasn't listening anymore. My focus was on Derek. His face was flushed now, his hands shaking ever so slightly as he wiped them on his pants. His confidence was gone, replaced by the growing realization that he was in deeper than he had ever imagined. His mask was slipping, and soon everyone in this room would see him for what he really was. When it was my turn to testify, I stood slowly, my legs steady beneath me. As I made my way to the witness stand, I felt the eyes of the courtroom on me. The judge, the jury, the lawyers, all of them watching. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was the truth. And today the truth would come out. I took the oath, my hand on the Bible, my fingers steady as I swore to tell the truth. The weight of the oath wasn't lost on me. It was a promise I had every intention of keeping. Mr. Bennett, the judge asked, please tell the court in your own words what happened. I took a deep breath and began. It started when I found a deed in my office, signed with my name, but it wasn't my signature. Derek had forged it, using my name to steal $2 million from me. I've spent years building my business, my family's future, and Derek used that trust to take it from me. I looked directly at Derek as I spoke, watching his face twist into a mask of denial, but I didn't look away. I couldn't. I had to make him see that he was caught, that there was no escaping the truth. Thus gathered all the evidence, I continued, my voice steady now, receipts, bank statements, the forged deed. Derek thought he could get away with it, but he underestimated me. He underestimated what I had been willing to do to protect what Hessep's mine. When I finished, I looked back at the judge. There was no need for more words. The evidence was there, clear and undeniable. Derek had been caught, and the truth was now out in the open. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as Derek's lawyer scrambled to respond, but there was no response to give. The case had already been made. The gavel came down with a sharp bang. Guilty, the judge said, his voice firm. Mr. Collins, you are hereby found guilty of fraud and forgery. The court will proceed with sentencing. And with that, Derek's world came crashing down. The courtroom was a blur. The judge's words echoed in my mind, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. Guilty, that was it. The fight was over, and Derek had lost. The truth had been laid bare for everyone to see. And in the end, it was more than just the $2 million that he'd tried to steal. It was about everything he had taken. My trust, my family, the years of hard work I'd poured into building something I could be proud of. And in that moment, I knew the victory wasn't just about the court ruling, it was about finally reclaiming what had been taken from me. The room buzzed with activity as Derek's lawyer packed up his things, the disappointment on his face as clear as day. I didn't look at Derek. I couldn't. The man who had once been family, who had once been someone I trusted, was now nothing more than a criminal in my eyes. There was no sympathy left for him. There was nothing but the truth, and the truth had destroyed him. I stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, the weight of the verdict still settling in my bones. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this exhausted. It wasn't just the stress of the trial or the burden of fighting for justice. It was the toll that Derek's betrayal had taken on me, on my family, on everything I'd ever known. As I waited for the rest of the formalities to be completed, I glanced over at Emily, who stood by the wall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She hadn't said much since the verdict, but I could see it in her eyes. The relief was there, but it was overshadowed by something else. Something deeper. The realization that she had been lied to, manipulated, and used by the man she had trusted more than anyone else. Her father had been right all along. Derek had taken more from her than just money. I started, my voice thick with emotion, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. There was nothing I could say that would make this easier for her. Emily turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment we just stood there, locked in silence, both of us processing the same weight. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. I didn't want to believe it, Dad. I didn't want to see the truth. But I do now. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I know you didn't, I know. But the truth has a way of coming out, whether we want it to or not. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she took a step toward me, her shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world had settled on them. She had been through so much in such a short time, and I could see the toll it had taken on her. It wasn't just Derek's betrayal that had hurt her. It was the shattering of everything she had believed in. Her perception of the world, of people, of trust, had been turned upside down. "Dad," she said softly, looking up at me with a mixture of vulnerability and strength. "I don't know if I still ever be able to forgive him, but I sip am glad it sips over. I don't know if I'd have to keep pretending anymore." I reached out and pulled her into a tight hug, my arms wrapping around her like I hadn't set done in years. "You don't set have to forgive him, Em. You don't set owe him anything. What he did, it wasn't set your fault." She buried her face in my chest, her breath uneven as she let out a shuddering sigh. "I know," she whispered, "but it still hurts. It hurts more than I thought it would." "I know," I said again, my voice thick with emotion. "I know it does." We stood there for a moment, holding on to each other, the weight of everything we'd just been through settling between us. But I wasn't going to let her carry this burden alone. She was my daughter, and as long as I was alive, I would protect her from the pain that came with betrayal. As we pulled away from the embrace, I saw Mac standing in the hallway, watching us with a quiet smile on his face. I hadn't even realized he was there, but it didn't surprise me. He had been by my side from the beginning, and now, as the case was finally over, I knew that I wasn't alone in this. Mac had been a brother to me, and even when everything else had seemed to fall apart, he had been there, steady, reliable, unwavering. "You did good, Richard," Mac said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Real good. You got your family back." I nodded, but it wasn't just about getting Emily back. It was about restoring what had been lost: trust, dignity, and respect. Derek had taken everything he could from me, but he hadn't taken my family. He hadn't taken my legacy. That was mine to protect, and no one could steal that from me. "It's not over yet," I said, my voice firm. "There's still the matter of the sentencing. Derek Sit's going to have to pay for what he did." Mac gave me a pointed look, the kind that told me he understood the weight of my words. As the court emptied and the crowd began to filter out, I stood there with my daughter by my side, Mac behind me, knowing that we were on the other side of the storm. Derek had done his worst, but now the truth was out, and the consequences were his to bear. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: peace. The battle wasn't over, but the worst of it was. And now we could finally start the process of rebuilding. Not just the business, but everything that had been broken. "We till get through this, Dad," Emily said softly, her hand slipping into mine. "We till be okay." I squeezed her hand tightly, knowing that no matter what came next, we would face it together. It's strange how the smallest gestures can carry the heaviest weight. For me, it wasn't the finality of the trial or the court's verdict that brought me peace. It was a postcard. The weeks after the trial felt like the slow burn of healing. The cracks in my family were still there, deep, painful fissures that wouldn't mend overnight, but we were trying. Emily and I had found some ground to stand on, our relationship a bit shakier but solid enough. She wasn't quite the same as before, and neither was I. But we had learned something about trust, something about boundaries. And then, one morning in early December, I walked into the kitchen to find a postcard resting on the table. It was from Mac, of course. He'd been true to his word, keeping in touch through the whole mess. I hadn't expected anything from him this time. But the card he'd sent was simple. Just a picture of a Marine Corps flag flying high over a barren field. The kind of sight I'd seen 100 times during deployments. The kind of sight that still made my heart ache in a way I hadn't fully understood until it was too late. The words written in the corner were just 4. "Still got your 6." I didn't need to ask what that meant. In the world Mac and I had come from, that was more than just a phrase. It was a promise. A bond that no betrayal, no lie, no amount of time could ever break. He had my back. He always had, and he always would. I stared at the postcard for a moment, the weight of it settling in. There was something about the words, something that felt like a release. The storm with Derek was over. But this small token, this simple message, felt like the final chapter, the last part of the war that needed to be fought, not with force, but with the understanding that no matter how dark things had gotten, I wasn't alone. Emily came into the kitchen just then, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her hair a tangled mess of curls. She stopped when she saw the postcard in my hands. "What's that?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. I held it up, showing her the image, and then the words. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at it, and then at me. Her expression softened, the tension from the past few months finally starting to loosen. "He really means that," she said, her voice quiet but knowing. "Yeah," I said, my voice gruff. "He does." For a moment we were both quiet, the postcard between us like a bridge being built, connecting everything that had been broken. It was like the smallest part of everything coming full circle. The trial was done, Derek was gone from our lives, and the truth had won. But this felt like closure, like the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't even known I was still putting together. I looked up at Emily, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal anymore, it was something else. Something softer, like the start of healing. "I said, I'm glad you've got people like him on your side," she said, her voice softer now, a little more open. "And I said, I'm glad you've got my back, Dad." I nodded, the lump in my throat returning. "Always, Em, always." She took a step closer and gave me a quick hug, her arms around me like she was trying to hold on to something. I held her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like everything might just be okay. It wasn't perfect, there was still a long road ahead, but we were walking it together, and that was enough for now. The postcard stayed on the table for the next few days, and every time I passed by it, I felt that quiet sense of relief, of resolution. It wasn't just about Derek anymore. It was about the future, about what we were going to build next. Emily and I still had a lot to work through, but we had something stronger now. Trust, we had each other, and we had people who cared enough to fight for us. Mac had been there when I needed him most, and I knew deep down that he always would be. Later that afternoon, I tucked the postcard into a drawer in my desk. It wasn't just a memory of the fight we'd won. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there were always people willing to stand by you. People who would always have your six. And that, more than anything else, was what kept me moving forward.